Good morning, Creative Mornings. I am humbled to be with you. I was saying to some people earlier, I've given lots of talks, but this is, I'm almost speechless, but then I have to obviously talk. Congratulations to you all for being part of this amazing community. I am part of a community that is in awe of your community, the community I've just witnessed this morning for the first time. This is my first Creative Morning. I'm also very humbled by Scott's remarks. Scott, it's always great to have a good friend, right? And Scott just proved that worth tenfold. So I'm going to preface everything I say by I'm really delighted to have somebody come up with a filter for me to hang my comments on. And as I read for the first time what flow is, it took me a while, it took me a few days to think about what flow is to myself, what it probably means to you all. And rather than trying to find somewhere in my life or world that flow exists, after a couple of days of sitting with the quotes that I read on the website and the great folks shared with me in prep for today, I realized for the first time that I'm living this thing that seems to be a chapter or a prevalent topic in literature and in conversation with you all. And so I took bits and pieces of it, and I found the four things that really resonated with me is the word experience. I know there's the experience economy and trying to create places where people have experiences versus just witness something. I found, as Scott mentioned, to have completely immersed myself and hope others can completely immerse themselves in the thing that drives them. And I'll talk about the thing that drives me through this morning's slides. It is interesting that people have commented on me and the pursuits of my friends and people like Scott. There's a social group around this pursuit. Whatever your pursuit is, I can't comment on that. But when you're in it, right, you know that thing that drives you. For all of us, it's something quite different. And then it took me a long time, and there's a couple people in this room that took a class that I taught at SDSU 15 years ago or something like that, and I thought that was my skill. And then I'm standing up here in front of you to talk about a completely different skill that I've honed and understood in my flow. And to really distill that down in prep for today, I thought, what is it that I could write down, and obviously put on a slide, but write down and say, this is the thing, this is the distillation of it all, right? So if I can put these three things together, and right now I am flowing, right? This is it, right? To be able to stand in front of you and talk about the three things that drive me and my entire world. Now, certainly economics are in there, right? Revenue, commerce, cash, whatever you want to call it. That is the undercurrent, and Scott did mention I'm a real estate agent, and generally people go to that first, but I'm going to talk about the underpinnings of that, and I'm going to take revenue sort of off the table for the moment, right? So the thing that drives me is education. I hope today to share with you anything, something, just a nugget that you find, say, hey, that's something I didn't know or didn't think about. The concern of mine, especially as I look out these wonderful windows, is architecture and why it's important, right? It's the idea that you drive by, walk by, travel through, work in, live in a building, and you generally don't think about it. Most people, I should say, maybe not Creative Mornings attendees, but most people don't think about it. And my desire is to educate the public, including my own family, right? Just anybody that will come in contact with me, why it's important. This building, does anyone know what this building is? Is there anyone that knows where this building is or its name in San Diego? It's a San Diego building. It happens to be where I was born. This is Mercy Hospital upon its completion, right? How many of you know where Mercy Hospital is? It's the north end of Hillcrest. You don't care unless you're traveling there for a sick relative or you're there yourself. Hopefully not. angle, that vantage point, at the time of its creation was extremely progressive for a rather conservative town. It happens to be where I was born, and therefore part of my efforts in education is to revel in and share with you my love affair with San Diego. There's a lot of boosterism, and I'll get to that, but think about the place, either where you were born, where you went to school, your alumni status at your high school or college. You feel that special place that you want to share with people, and mine is the entirety of San Diego County. I venture into Tijuana, I go to Orange County and out to Borrego on occasion, but really it's the county, the city even more so than the county. History. I am not a historian. I have not a degree in history. I have never taught a class in history. But there's something of value for me every day knowing that the place we enjoy, the people we enjoy, have lots and lots of layers to the backstory. Does anyone know who the gentleman on the left is? It's Frank Lloyd Wright. This picture was taken in San Diego. Most people don't know he was here designing buildings and giving lectures. I can often drop that pin in your mental map so you go, oh, okay, Frank Lloyd Wright, okay, I know that, right? If anybody knows anything about architects, that's the one name they know, and it was the first name I became aware of. Now, I can talk a lot. I can do a whole lecture on Frank Lloyd Wright. I, in fact, have done that, right? But the woman on the right is just as important in this photo for me, and I hope to make it important for you. Janet Richards is the woman that we, my family and I, now live in her home. We came to know her towards the end of her life. She obviously passed just shy of her 101st birthday a couple years ago. A very, very special woman that anyone that looks at this photo would not know the years and years, the decades even, of history behind who she is and why she would be in this really fascinating photo prior to him giving a lecture in Balboa Park about the need for San Diego to build an opera house, a world-class Sydney, Australia level opera house. Project never came to completion. This is all over Instagram. This photo is of my house, my old house, I don't live there anymore. Shows up in my Instagram feed, I guess you call it, all these savvy people. And I go, wait, there's the picture of my house again, right? This photo moves around the internet and social media at a level that has become really fascinating for me. My amazing partner in crime and friend, Darren Bradley, who many of you might know, is an amazing man who captured the essence of how my wife and daughter and I live, or at least lived in that house. As Scott went long in the tooth about aesthetics, we create a space where we live and we revel in the fact that it looks to most people like a curated environment, right? It isn't purposefully that way, it's just the way we live. But aesthetics, as you can imagine from the frame, that's how we live. Aesthetics drive almost everything I do. I was in a job interview once, and I learned to not do this after I walked out of the job interview. Is strangely, the president of SDSU said to me, of all the sort of challenges and governing laws of the world, what is the thing that drives you most? I said aesthetics. And I was applying for a job to be, to work by his side in an office environment. It's like, okay, that's not it. I should have said order, right? Discipline. And I said, well, the thing that drives me is the way things look and feel and touch and taste and sound, right? Scott made that mention of my music nerd part of my life, right? It's everything that is sensory is something that really, really drives every decision I make. So I'll start now with the road to the gallery show that's up just as you exit, right? So after today, if you're gonna take a break from getting into your car, walk out the patio, and you'll see the gallery exhibition I have up right now, right? Which is the most recent work I've done, and probably the driving reason for being asked to be here today with you is a show about Julius Schulman, the architectural photographer. So years and years ago, someone said this to me, and I laughed. I'm like, how does architecture become someone's hobby? I often get confused with someone saying, oh, you're an architect. I'm like, no, it's just my hobby. And then how is architecture a hobby? It's like seeing, like something from a distance being your hobby, but not something you enjoy or practice. And that sat with me for years and years and years because I thought that was the weirdest thing to have as a hobby. And then one day, so this is my 20s, by the way. This is very formative years. For some of you, you're living the 20s, right? 20s are great. So I'm in grad school. I'm in the SDSU library, and I'm studying for something, and I'm writing something, and I had to take a break. And I knew, again, Frank Lloyd Wright, I knew this name. So I looked in the catalog. I went to the section on architecture books, and I was pulling out a book on Frank Lloyd Wright. And this book literally fell on the floor. And it's one of those moments in time that still give me goosebumps. So I pull out, you pull out and they're all tight, and you pull out a book and then another one sort of laps down on the ground accidentally. And I look at it and I see the vantage point you're looking at now at my feet. And I'm like, what is that? I mean, look at those lines. What is that? And I pick the book up with the Frank Lloyd Wright book and I go and I sit and it's literally just eye candy to get away from what I'm studying. And then I buy a house that's by the guy that book is about. But I buy the house not knowing that it's the same architect. But that book really sat with me for a while. So I end up buying this house. And in the process of the house, this gentleman says, oh, it's weird that while we're in escrow, this guy with leather patches and a suit coat and British accent came by, and he's writing a book on this guy that apparently did the house you're about to buy. And I'm like, wait, what? So I found that house, which you saw in the color photograph of the living room earlier, becomes this driving force in my life to find out more about it, to find out more if there's other houses like that. A world famous, I mean, I don't mean that loosely, there are coffee table books about this guy. He traveled the world. A world famous architect, I'm buying his house completely unknown to the community. I type emails to people in the city, people in government, people at the AIA offices here in town, people that are architects, people that have written books on architecture. No one knew this house existed. And I'm like, okay, there's something in here, the flow, right? I start feeling there's something going on that I need to pursue. So fast forward through my life, there's lots of jobs. My wife jokes a lot about my concurrency with jobs. I'm always doing multiple things for cash. I'm consulting here, I'm working for so-and-so. And yet I wasn't figuring out, like the flow wasn't happening. I was just working. I wasn't applying the skill that I hope I'm applying now and engaging you and your intention, your interest. But I was just doing stuff, right? And that was my 20s. It was most of my 30s. And then I got into my 40s, and that house and stuff started to flow. That I wasn't just working for a paycheck or to feel needed in a community or to have a social connection to other people in the office. I was trying to figure out what my purpose was, I guess. Now, the photo is actually just as important, right? The photo comes about when I just happened to this woman's house in La Jolla. I knock on her door. I was told that you have something to do with mid-century modernism in San Diego. And she welcomes me into a house designed by a fairly famous LA architect, humbly seats me down, serves me coffee, and tells me about her late husband, who's this gentleman in the Eames 670 and 671 lounge in Ottoman. Yes, the chair is that important to me that I have to remark on its catalog number. Dean Marshall ran the shop in town that sold modern furniture, candlesticks, rugs, textiles, all the things I think you probably go, oh, that's mid-century modern. He was dealing it on La Jolla Boulevard, right, out of his shop. And I've come to understand, isolate, remark on, write about retail stores that were on the cutting edge of a conservative town at a time after the war when a lot was changing. Culturally, literature, film, everything was changing after the war. And it's become really, really interesting to me. And this is a case where I started putting on events trying to figure out what that flow was, right? What is it that is carrying forward? So I started getting friends together to watch films at the Ken Cinema or to lecture at the Museum of Photographic Arts Film Theater. And I started putting on tours, and I started lecturing, and I started just trying to get some momentum around this topic that, frankly, everyone thinks happened in LA and happened in Palm Springs. But I'm here to tell you that through my time and effort and passion with my friends and my family, there is more to be told here about the development of an amazing cadre of architects, landscape architects, artists that pushed San Diego to its social limits, to its cultural limits for a blink of an eye in history, and we've all forgotten it, and we continue to drive up to Palm Springs and think that that's where it all happened. A lot happened here on the international stage, and we have not exposed that history, but we haven't reveled in it, right? We haven't engaged in it. One of the first examples of that beyond my first house was finding out that there were case study houses here. Now, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the case study program, but after World War II, some of the most progressive residential designs ever out there in the world were happening in Southern California, and they were sponsored by this magazine called Arts and Architecture, which a magazine, a print publication that combined artists and architects. Right? There were books and paintings, ceramics, all in the same magazine with architecture. No one had thought of that until that moment in time in the US. And what they did is they captured these amazing houses, and this house and this photograph are part of the library, the library's exhibition I have in the gallery. So Julius Schulman, LA guy, taking a picture of a Long Beach architect's home design that was planned for a whole tract of these really, really fantastic rectilinear glass homes. There was one of these. There's actually 3 of them in San Diego. So I'm like, wait. So I buy this house. I unveil that. A friend of mine buys a house by Richard Neutra, world-famous architect. World-famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright was here designing projects. Didn't build any. Rudolf Schindler, world-famous architect, built projects in San Diego. And I'm like, wait, how come this isn't being shared? And then I met this guy on the left, Robert Mosier, the humblest, sweetest architect, sitting here having dinner with Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn, as you may or may not know, is probably just junior to Frank Lloyd Wright as far as being an important architect on the world stage, designed the Salk Institute. And while in town, has dinner with Robert Mosier. Robert Mosier tells me stories before his passing about all this wonderful stuff that I was just on the tip of an iceberg learning. But he sat me down on many occasions, and I've dedicated much of, including today's talk, to the spirit of people like that sharing with one another. Robert didn't know me from his neighbor, but we spent many years together talking about photos like this and the meaning behind them, the events that took place that they are capturing. And I'm here hopefully to just give you that sense that there's a heck of a lot more in the design and creative fields in San Diego's history to investigate, to revel in, maybe to buy something. Bring something in your home by a San Diegan. I said earlier that I worked at SDSU, so I had a career teaching and working on campus. And I used to dine in this building every day. And a couple of years, I don't know, how many years ago was this? 8? I was doing a lecture with Robert, so the guy on the left, and he designed this building. It was the Aztec Center. Many of you probably went there, right? Didn't think much of it. Again, earlier, I said you travel through and witness life in architecture and you don't think about it. So I'm with Robert the night that this building gets torn down, and he cried, right? Here's a guy in his late 80s who's talking to me about one of his children. And it's now a much larger building that probably programmatically fits what SDSU needs. But I end up doing a pechakucha, or a pachachka, on buildings that are no longer there anymore. And I think, if I remember, the audience's reaction was, Jesus, Keith, stop doing this. Like building after building, just tugging at my heartstrings. about the loss of this community, the things that our community has lost. So I found that there's a story, right? There's a story behind every building. It's not just architecture. It's not just buildings and houses and hospitals. It's stories. And I came across this house, which my client ended up asking me to sell, which is hands down the coolest house in City Heights. I'll just say that right now. A modest home for a modest family by a local architect, Lloyd Ruaco, that took some unveiling. There were no blueprints that said, here's who it's by. There was no sign out front that said, here's who designed this house. We had to dig and learn about the history of the family, the guy that built it himself for his family, a probably pioneering house in a community that was mostly just weeds and dirt at the time. And the people that are still there that love it, right? As Scott said earlier, the stories about the houses are just fascinating, and they can engage the next owner for many years to come. This is the coolest house in South Park. I dare anybody to counter me. Again, this is also one of the very, 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 very first works of modern architecture in this city. Now, there's lots to unveil there. There's lots to, I go deep, but you don't have time. But let me just say, one of the first modern homes in all of the county is in South Park. And I had the opportunity to work with buyers and sellers to put them in a home that means a great deal, contextually, as well as just personally, for them to live in a really, really fantastic place. It took a lot of education. We had to explain to the seller that it was time. We had to explain to the buyer what they were buying. And we had to get everybody on board. It wasn't just commerce. And then more distinctly, more directly to the library exhibition, along this path, I had the joy of meeting Julius Schulman, the gentleman on the left. I'm just checking on time. Okay. He took pictures, right? Took pictures, photographer. Not my flow, not my skill, not my wheelhouse, not my training, but he took pictures. And I met him in probably his late 80s, and I said to him, did you ever go to San Diego? And he's like, yeah, come up to my studio in LA, which is this, an amazing steel home by Rafael Soriano, an amazing thing if you would ever have a chance to venture there. In and of itself, just stopping by would blow your mind. I got to spend day after day after day going through 3x5 index cards and handwriting, La Jolla, no address, house, architect. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do, right? So I worked with him for a few years, and I remember every visit before his passing, going to his studio saying, I can't believe I'm here. And I was flowing. Is that right to say? Is that a verb? To flow, we flow, you're all flowing. I'm certainly flowing right now. I was there where it all happened. And then I start looking at, well, what are photos themselves, remarking on? You can all look at a coffee table book really quickly. I know, do you do this on your Instagram or, right? And you go through dozens, I've seen some of you, right? I've been in a public space looking over someone's shoulder at their Instagram feed, and their thumb just like glazes, like, and you're going over it. I'm like, oh, there's a good one, but I'm like, and I find images like this that lead me on a path to curating an exhibition on Frank Lloyd Wright. I am not a historian. I don't have a PhD in curating, but I find that I found myself as someone that cared that he came to San Diego and he put something together, right, for a client. I talked to the client, the house is not there, but I find that there's a legacy of the material, right? There's something still residually here in San Diego that has his stamp on it. I came to a late realization in life that black and white photography, the romantic capture of anything, lures me in aesthetically at a rate I couldn't actually put words to until more recently. Then, fast forward to this last month. We put a lot of those black and white photographs together at the La Jolla Historical Society. This is the Oxley House by Richard Neutra in La Jolla. And then in the gallery to your left are photographs by that man that I showed you earlier, in that studio that I showed you earlier. And I think about the photography itself as communicating the value of architecture and possibly why we travel through and around these buildings and don't care is because we don't see them in this context. When a photographer, videographer captures that frame and that essence, we're like, that building is not a building anymore, right? It's something almost sacred, right? It's risen to a higher plane than just where someone lives. I've showed this photo so many times that people are like, that's not in San Diego. Come on, you're pulling my leg. My friend was the HR manager at General Dynamics growing up as a kid. This was the lobby of a building on the 15 freeway, or the 163 actually, north of Montgomery Field, most of it torn down. But this is progressive architecture that you could say, if I said, this is in Luzern, Switzerland, you'd go, yeah, that looks about right. Like, oh, this is in Dessau, Germany, and this is a Bauhaus architect. You go, yeah, okay, I see that, yeah, you're right. But I show this picture, and there's more to this image, but suffice to say, there were things happening in San Diego that predate Creative Mornings that were really cool. And so I'm here to hopefully welcome you to, as you leave, to check out the gallery. You could check out my website, you could talk, we could email. But where I feel like I'm in the sweet spot of where we go next, right? And I like to talk about the future as much as I like to talk about the past or the present, is that's the woman that was there adjacent to Frank Lloyd Wright. So that's Janet, and that's her husband, Bruce, in our kitchen, which is so cool. I get to be in that kitchen every morning. I made coffee in the kitchen this morning. Right where he's standing is our coffee maker. So Bruce is my next foray, right? There's a story there that has captured my attention, and it's flowed. It's all about all those things that we're thinking about in flow. He was flowing. He was an amazing guy. Studied with Frank Lloyd Wright, again, a name you know, right? That's my point. Progressive architect, outspoken community activist, part Cherokee Indian, married a woman because she had gasoline in World War II, and she had a car. And you start unveiling the fabric of people's lives, and you say, wow, there's more there, and I want to know. Like, you get seduced into the topic. So now I know more about these two than some of their children, and they think it's odd that some person from outside their family is so interested than in their family. And so off together on this pursuit is the restoration of another house, like the one I showed you earlier. This is our newer home, by that guy, that kitchen. And I'm hoping that in the coming months or years, another exhibition and a monograph on this guy and his wife and his family and these houses pulls you at another string, right? It's another fabric, little tease out another thread from your fabric to say, gosh, another example of something really amazing in San Diego that I didn't know about? Really? Is there that much here? I could leave you today with just saying that one of the very first works of modern architecture in the entire world was in Bonita, California. There's a house that my friend Greg owns that is actually almost by the week, like if you measure finished completion, is a house that challenges the house in Europe that everyone thinks is the first work of modern architecture in the world. And it happened here. And perhaps, whether that was history or education or aesthetics, I propel you forward as we close this talk with going, I think he said something about the first work of modern architecture is in San Diego. How weird is that? And the woman that's been here for only a month, Jordan, where did you, a month? And you're witnessing what took me a lot longer, I'll just say that, to come back. And the thing that I loved about learning about flow while prepping to be with you today was this idea that when you're flowing, time is dissolving. Like, it's not relevant what time it is or how much it's passed because you are in it. And I love that feeling for myself, and I hope you all get to experience that today on your journey.